New census data shows Connecticut has grown increasingly diverse over the last 10 years. The largest percentage gain was in the Asian population, which grew 63.9% from 2000 to 2010. The number of Latinos grew by 49.6% to more than 479,000. The non-Hispanic white population fell about 3%. The overall state population grew just under 5%. So which is Connecticut's biggest city? That is Bridgeport, followed by New Haven, Hartford, Stamford, and Waterbury. So what is the story behind the numbers? Here to talk about Connecticut's growing community is Wilson CameloBauza and Associates Hispanic Marketing, and Ulysses Arrigoitia, VP and GM of Univision, Connecticut. Thanks, both of you, for being here.
Our pleasure.
So what should we be learning from these numbers, and why should perhaps lawmakers and business people be paying attention?
Well, if at any time the sleeping giant has awoken, it is now. You know, the Hispanic market's always been talked about a sleeping giant, but these numbers really demonstrate a dramatic shift. You know, as you showed there, yeah, the Asian population had a percentage larger population growth, but it was only about 50,000 people added to Connecticut, where Hispanics was about 160,000, 158,000 out of 168,000 total people added to Connecticut, which means about 94% of the actual growth in Connecticut came from the Hispanic population.
So let's start first off there. So where are these people all coming from?
Well, the growth has actually been coming from second and third generation. We're having more kids. We have a full one child more per household, so that's what's fueling a lot of the growth. But we're seeing a lot of influx as well from the non-traditionally Hispanic populations. You know, the Caribbean-based populations that are kind of more traditional to here. We're seeing the growth coming from Central and South American as well as Mexican people coming for economic reasons, et cetera.
Right, interesting. And so you see, Ulysses, you see it being reflected in your advertising dollars, et cetera?
Absolutely. Since we've been here 10 years now, we've seen a steady growth in revenues and also an audience over the years. But if I may add to Wilson's comment, a lot of the immigration is first generation, needless to say. And that generation is coming that's a little more middle class to upper class with a education. So we definitely are happy to be in this position today.
Right. So he has a business, okay? He has a news channel, obviously, a TV channel that caters to Hispanics, to Spanish-speaking Hispanics. But how do other businesses who perhaps do not have that niche, why should they care about these numbers?
Well, I mean, with the numbers also comes economic impact as well as voting power, et cetera. So what really companies should be doing is looking at who is really my market today, because that demographic has shifted. We look at Connecticut in the 2000 census, almost 80% of the population was non-Hispanic white. That's dropped now to about 70%. So when we look at our budgets and how we allocate those budgets, we have to do it by who really is my client today or my prospective client today, not who I think it was yesterday. So we really have to look at not necessarily growing a budget specific to the Hispanic market, but saying how can I allocate my existing budget in a smarter way to better reach my consumer.
And it's more, and you are from a marketing agency, so it's much more detailed, right, than just putting out literature in Spanish.
That's right, yeah. When it comes to marketing to Hispanics, it's like any kind of marketing. You have to understand your audience. You have to know what motivates them to buy your product. And oftentimes those have cultural ramifications. You know, we come from countries where we have, you know, established norms, established customs that we bring to this country. So appealing to me not only from an intellectual perspective, but also in my heart and my Latino identity. So that's really where our agency, Bauza & Associates, specializes in, is what we consider culturally relevant communication. And we call that transcreation.
Right.
We don't call it translation. It's how do I transcreate a brand to be relevant to the Hispanic consumer.
Now, do you have brands that are advertising on Univision that are, you know, like a Travelers or a non-Hispanic?
The biggest advertisers that are targeting Hispanics is people like Procter & Gamble, AT&T. You have folks like Verizon, et cetera, et cetera. Telecom is a big category, but there's a lot of also retailers. JCPenney is a big advertiser in the Spanish arena, and they've been consistent about it. They see it, they get it, and they will not stop. In fact, we expect them to, obviously with all these numbers coming out, see big increases.
Interesting. Do you, what happens, do you think, in your opinion, if companies kind of ignore the numbers?
Really, they do it at their own peril because, you know, the Hispanic population is not trending down. You know, here in Connecticut, non-Hispanic whites decreased by almost 100,000 people. So, in 2005, UConn came out with a study that showed that the non-Hispanic white population was trending down. The census validated that. So the consumer's different, the consumer's changing, the consumer's more multicultural, and if you don't have an approach really that's doing that, I'm sure your competitor does. So if you're not behind your competitor, you're also going to be, losing in the long run.
Right. We were talking before the show, and you mentioned voting power. And I'm interested, as businessmen, both of you, what your thoughts are on how government should be adjusting and adapting and listening to these numbers.
Well, we feel strongly that there's a need for information. This group comes from countries that perhaps has different laws, different nuances, different ways of doing business, and taking care of their community. So there's a critical point that they need to realize that we better start doing this.
I would add to that as well that, right now from a state perspective, we're working with the Department of Public Health and their anti-tobacco campaign, as well as the Department of Transportation with the Spanish language Click It or Ticket campaign. Those are about the only two examples of state agencies that are actually putting a specialized effort and emphasis on how do I communicate to the Hispanic population. So I would encourage the other state agencies to really look at, who's the beneficiary of my service, who's the beneficiary of my, of my message, and allocate those budgets appropriately. There's about 5 agencies such as ours that are Spanish Hispanic focused on the state RFP. So there's no reason why even partitioning and allocating a separate budget to allow us to compete as an RFP rather than bundling it as an all-encompassing kind of budget that oftentimes the agencies that are hired don't put a special emphasis on the Hispanic market.
Right.
100% of the budget gets basically allocated to the general market,
right,
where who's receiving those services tend to also be Hispanic.
Right. Interesting. All right. Well, I appreciate both of you coming in. I think it's certainly a trend that we should all be paying attention to, and we'll be seeing over the next few years. Thanks very much for being here. Well, don't forget, if you missed something here on The Real Story, you can now watch it online by going to ctnow.com. You can also catch us on YouTube. Thanks so much for watching this week's edition of The Real Story. We'll see you here again next week.